I'm Jim LaDuke and Bill Mills up here. We came up with this idea of basically wanting to tell about some stories of some of the people that are very, very special to us. We're talking about the greatest generation. Tom Brokaw wrote, "It is, I believe, the greatest generation any society ever produced." He argued that these men and women fought not for fame and recognition because it was the right thing to do. Veteran Story Night was started in 2019, and so far we've had 128 veterans and one concentration survivor talk, and she's here tonight too. What a successful program. We really have a good crowd every time, and we really appreciate you all coming. Tonight we are changing a bit, as Bill Mills and I will be talking about 3 veterans and one home front family member who we want to tell their stories of what they contributed to the war effort. One made the ultimate sacrifice, and the other 3 survived the war. The 4 are Everett Mills, U.S. Navy, father of Bill and Mike Mills; Joe Tallman, U.S. Army, birth father of Becky Tallman LaDuke; Bob Ruth, U.S. Navy, dad of Becky LaDuke and who raised her; and Joe LaDuke, who's the father of Jim LaDuke, and he was a division manager of the tail section of the B-25 in the Fairfax district of Kansas City, Missouri. So we're going to be showing you some pictures and just some things there. But at this time, Bill is up.
I'm Bill Mills, and I'm here with my wife, Peggy. She's on the second row. My brother is right ahead of her. I've also got my cousin Roger, who showed up quite unexpectedly and very pleasantly. He lives in Missouri and is coming back with his wife Kathy from a graduation ceremony in Colorado. And I also want to thank some other people that are here. Basically, I want to thank Tracy Forsberg, my secretary, who really did the work to pull this all together. I want to thank Jim LaDuke for getting this organized. Also want to thank Brandon Likely, correct? And Paul Light. They've done a lot of work for us to getting this ready, so I did want to thank them. Also want to thank the Legion Post 24 here for allowing me to come up and give you a veteran story, not mine, but my father, Everett Mills. Let me give you a background on my dad, and this is kind of what I picked up from my elder brother. In 1943, Dad was about 34 years of age. He's just about over the age of any threat of draft. He was a sole practicing attorney here in McPherson, was married and had 2 children. Mickey Mills was what he was known as at that time. Sorry, Mike, your secret is out. And my sister, Sharon. They were about 7 and 6 about that time. Dad was a sole practitioner, so he had had been in town not quite 10 years, and had a family such as that. And the war had been a little bit more than a year old when he determined he wanted to get involved in what was going on. He began by applying to the Army JAG Corps, Judge Advocate General, because he was an attorney. But there were no slots available. And then someone, and I forgot who it was, suggested that he might want to consider going into the Navy 90-day officer training corps. And so he decided he would try that. He applied on March the 6th of 1943. He was accepted on May the 17th, 1943. And at the end of May, he shut his office down, closed his practice, left the secretary to keep an eye on things, and went off for training. I believe that was up at Great Lakes, and I stand to be corrected on that. He entered into a class of 90-day wonders, and at the end of that period of time, he was graduated as an officer and gentleman in the United States Naval Reserve. In his group was another candidate or volunteer whose name you may remember, Henry Fonda. the actor. He continued his training as going out to Astoria, Oregon, which was preparing him for sea duty and whatnot. And ultimately, he was assigned to the escort carrier USS Bismarck Sea, CVE number 95. I'll digress here real quickly. On the back of Jim's and my building, we have a gray tornado shelter. And through the help of Brandon and Paul, it's got a CVE 95, and that is the number for my dad's carrier. I want to tell you a little bit about the escort carriers. These were reconfiguration of the Kaiser Corporation Liberty ships that went to England to make sure that they had supplies at the beginning of the war. They were converted by putting on a flight deck, a hangar deck, elevators, catapults, and an island on the flat top on the flight deck. I'm sure there were other changes, but they were built very rapidly. They had welded seams rather than riveted seams, and they were all basically carbon copies of each other. 512 feet in length, 60-foot beam. There were 122 of them made in World War II by Kaiser. The escort carrier was basically about half the size of the fleet carrier. They would hold 24 to 36 aircraft, had a crew of approximately 900 men, and the CVEs were called baby flat tops, Jeep carriers, Kaiser coffins. It was two steam twin engines that drove the screws on the ship. Had a top speed of 22 miles per hour. Pretty slow. They would have a cruising speed of 17 miles per hour, and with that, they could cover a range of over 10,000 miles if they were fully fueled. It's kind of interesting. The CVE had only a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch thick armor on the sides, whereas the fleet carriers had 2 to 4 inches of armor. On the top side, the baby flat tops had only 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch of steel, whereas the fleet carriers had 1.5 inches of armament. The Bismarck Sea had its keel laid on January 31, 1944, and was commissioned on May 4, 1944. In other words, it took just a little over 90 days to beginning to end to complete an aircraft carrier, a Jeep carrier. As I said, this was built by the Kaiser Corporation in Vancouver, Washington. It was originally named the Alicula Bay, but was renamed the Bismarck Sea on May the 16th and was commissioned on May the 20th, 1944. The Bismarck Sea was in service with the Navy as a convoy escort between San Diego and the Marshall Islands for the first several months, getting a shakedown and getting the crew ready and getting them battle ready, and then was assigned to the 7th Fleet in the early fall or late summer of 1944. You have your handout with you, and I would like to kind of refer to that. First picture is, of course, my dad. Second picture is a picture of the flight crew. A small picture of my dad in front of his house at 751 East Euclid, which is right at the end of Park Street in front of Washington School. If you go there, you can see that Munton window right behind it, and it's still there. Got a timeline on what's going, which is on the next page, but I'll kind of skip through that. What I want to do is get to 2 personal letters that were sent by my dad to my mom and siblings. First one is in January 1945, and I'm going to go through this partially just word by word. This is my first letter to you since December 26th, and the censorship regulations have been relaxed enough for me to tell you something about where I am and what I am doing. It is now 10:30 p.m., and we are traveling along and through the Sulu Sea, going south into the Mindanao Sea, and then through the Leyte Gulf back to the Pacific Ocean. We have been up to the South China Sea, off Lingayen Gulf for almost 2 weeks, taking everything the Japs had and finally chasing them off. Our carrier was part of was part of a large force of ships consisting of carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, and all of the various types of ships used to make a landing. The ships operated in a group, and our group was the first to enter into the South China Sea and since the beginning of the war. In fact, our carrier was a forward ship on the side next to the Philippine coast, and we saw quite a bit of Jap planes. I saw quite a number shot down while standing on the flight deck, and also saw quite a bit of damage done by them in their attacks. We preceded the Army group for 3 days in the Lingayen Gulf in their attacks. We set our planes over the Lingayen Gulf and kept them there patrolling the area while the time we were there. We paved the way for the landing, and our CVE planes were the sole protection for MacArthur and the Army for 8 days, although I've never heard or seen anything where he mentioned that fact. We flew shuttle hops for an hour before dawn until sunset, strafing, rocketing, and bombing the Lingayen area, and our warships laid down a heavy barrage along the shore and inland a few miles, knocking out Jap installations. We had so cleared out the area that the Army actually walked ashore without firing a shot. Planes from our ship knocked out gun emplacements, ammo dumps, barracks, trucks, locomotives, bridges, etc. The Army found plenty of dead Japs when the Navy knocked them out before, and the Army went ashore and right to the very center of the and when the Army went ashore. We also sank a couple of Jap destroyers with Schmidt, putting a torpedo right into the very center of one. Dignan led the division that shot down a first plane, and he, together with Weber and Jones, literally shot the Jap Zeke to pieces. We have gun camera pictures to prove it. Newspapers are gradually releasing the news of what the Japs did to the fleet, but our carrier and every man on it went through unscathed except for Lakin, who got a piece of AA in his right leg and was knocked out for a little while, but is up and walking now okay. I think the Navy should get most of the credit for the Lingayen landing, which is a key to the Philippines, because we cleared out the Japs ahead of the Army, transported them to the Gulf, put them ashore, chased out or killed all the Japs left in the area, and gave the Army a chance and protection for over a week, and gave them time to set itself up to get going without having any molestation whatsoever from the Japs. The Army is now on its own and is doing fine, and we are headed for a safe port where we can get a well-earned rest, and how I'm going to catch up on sleeping. General quarters started about 2 hours before sunrise and last until an hour after sunset. While at general quarters, every man must be at his battle station with steel helmet, and every officer carries a sidearm, and all hands wear a life belt with a knife similar to a hunting knife. I think that several times we, and I mean every man aboard ship, were pretty scared. But things worked out okay. I am now engaged in writing reports on the engagements and have 26 to write for the squadron besides some ship reports. I had my hands full briefing the pilots on what they were to do, and every time they took off, and then I had to interrogate them as to what they had done, what they had seen, and concerning general situation. From this information, I would send a dispatch to the Admiral within a very few minutes after the flight landed, and you can see that I was busier than the well-known proverbial one-armed paper hanger. However, it is quite nice to always know what's going on and to just what is being done. I can also say that we were in the Leyte Gulf landing, although we were under actual fire only once. We moved a lot of the Army boys into the area, and I was sure that Clyde, his brother-in-law, who is a physician, must have been in one of the transports that we covered until I found out that his unit was still in Hollandia. We spent quite some time outside Leyte Gulf until things were quieted down there, and then we went after some rest, but I did not get much as I was working on the details of the upcoming strikes. The timeline on this was that they had gone to the Leyte Gulf, and then my dad was helping in preparing the attack on Leyte Gulf after Mindanao. What am I trying to say here? Lingayen Gulf, and that's why he was so busy. I've got below this, if you look, is a map of the South China Sea, and there you can see where he's talking about where they were through the South China Sea, and then in the lower side through the Sulu Sea and then going to Mindanao, which is an island showing on the far right. The next map shows the Lingayen Gulf, and that's on Luzon, which is a capital island of the Philippines. And then finally, I've got a third map that shows Lingayen, or the Leyte Gulf, and there are 4 attack ships being shown by the red lines from the Japs and where they're going. The next letter I've got is on March 24th, 1945. Now understand the ship was sunk on February 21st. Okay, dearest Ruth, this afternoon I've been writing a lot of letters. Helen, Esther, the folks, income tax, and Georgia Shipman. Last night the sinking of the Bismarck Sea was announced, so I sat down and wrote Georgia a 7-page letter telling her all about it, and that George got off and into the water without being hurt, and that no one remembers seeing him again. The Bismarck Sea was hit about 15 minutes after sunset by one of 3 Jap planes making a coordinated attack. 2 were shot down, but the third continued. The ship was hit about 3/4 of the way aft, and a big explosion and fire followed. About 4 minutes later, we were hit again. The terrific explosion followed, and it blew off a lot of the flight deck. Water mains were broken, and bombs and ammunition and gas were started going off, and the captain ordered to abandon ship. Terrific explosions were taking place all the time, and everyone literally leapt off the ship. The sky was overcast and low-hanging clouds, and it was pitch dark when we left the ship. I didn't see a soul I knew when I went down the monkey line and swam as fast as possible to the rear to get clear of the exploding ship. I had been working on a water hose and did not hear the order to abandon ship, and when I got to my life raft I was supposed to have in charge of, all the rest of the rafts had been lowered and away. I got into the water without looking for any flotation gear. I was about 100 feet behind the carrier when the torpedo magazine blew. Nearly everyone around me got hit with shrapnel or flying pieces of debris, but I was not hit by anything big enough to get hurt. I floated in the water until I got a raft, and I, together with about 30 others, floated to a destroyer escort that we signaled with our flashlights. We were picked up after about 2 hours in the water. There was a pretty strong wind blowing, 22 knots, and we had 10 to 12-foot swells and choppy water 4 to 6 feet high. This meant we got covered with a wave every few minutes, and if one was not careful, got a big mouthful of very distasteful salt water. Several were killed or injured by the explosion and after in the water, and a few were killed by Jap planes strafing the men who were flashing their flashlights to the rescuing destroyers. I was sure glad I had my AAA swimming card, as I seemed to get along pretty well and was able to swim to the D.E. Taylor and climb cargo net with both jacket and wearing shoes on. The water was cool, but not so cold, being about 68 degrees. Cold water at home is about 65 degrees, but it sure numbed a person in a hurry. I had to keep moving a little all the time to keep from going numb. Anyway, it was quite an experience. Dignan, Schmidt, Hubert, and Barger are missing, and Brox was found dead in the water. No one was found alive in the water after 11 o'clock, and several were found dead floating in life jackets. They either drowned or died of exposure in 3 to 4 hours. It was extremely difficult to see anyone in that rough sea, over a third of our men were killed or missing. All that night and the next day, 6 ships hunted back and forth, but nothing was seen the next morning except for a few boxes and a huge oil slick. No bodies could be seen anywhere. We were taken to Iwo Jima, kept there for 4 days, then to Saipan for a couple of days, then on a slow freight to Pearl Harbor, which took 15 days, then 6 days at Pearl, and now I'm on the 2nd day out of Pearl, headed to San Pedro, California, where I expect to be there about the 30th or 31st. Now, going down a couple of notations in here, the last aircraft carrier sunk in World War II was, in fact, the USS Bismarck Sea, CVE number 95, on February the 21st, 1945, on a bomb at Iwo. There's a further description of what had taken place concerning that particular ship, 3 pages of it. If you care, you can read it at your leisure. We also have at the back about 13 or 14 page after action report drafted by my father concerning the sinking of the Bismarck Sea, and it's there for your reading. I'm not going to bore you with any of the details on that, but I do want to share with you how I got to hear some of this. So far as I know, my dad only told the story one time of what had happened. And that was when Peggy and I were freshly married, and we were out at McPherson over the Christmas holiday from law school. And we were at my parents' house at 751 East Euclid here in McPherson. It was around midnight, or a little after. Everybody was in bed except for the three of us, that being Dad, Peggy, and me. And there was a huge log that burned down on the fire, so it was just glowing embers. That was the only light we had. We'd all had some pretty good scotch, and I asked Dad to tell me what had occurred in sinking the ship. He started talking, and he went on for about an hour and a half, and Lord, I wish I'd have had a tape recorder. Several of the stories he shared was that as the Air Combat Control Officer, he would interrogate landing pilots, get information from them, send the information to headquarters, get a quick return for orders for the next day, at which time in the ready room he would tell the pilots what they would expect to see and what they should be looking for. He was a lawyer, and he could interrogate them fairly quickly and inform and get this over and over. But this inform, fly, interrogate went on over and over, typically 3 times a day. He was also in charge of the code book and dealing with secret communications. He also told us that when he first heard the explosion on the ship, he was in the wardroom, I believe, and he said that he went down and quickly take a look at the hangar deck, and he could see that the fire was raging, but it seemed to be under control. But he told us that he remembered seeing a sailor running across the hangar deck towards a ladder leading up to where he was. I remember he didn't have a shirt on, but he had a lot of red marks in his chest and his belly. When he got to the top of the ladder, the kid turned around, his back was gone. He had been running dead, and it just really was a nightmare for him. After the second plane hit, he as an officer was in charge of a life raft or whatnot, and he started to go to it as he was supposed to, but he remembered that he had to get rid of the code book, which was up in the island. He was supposed to put the code book into a lead-weighted canvas bag and throw it overboard. He started to go up there and realized pretty quickly this is a waste of time because everything aboard the ship, including the code book, was going to go be on the bottom of the ocean shortly. He then went back to where his life raft should have been, but it was gone. He told us that none of the people assigned to that particular life raft were ever seen or heard of after they got away. He also told us about how he had gone down the monkey line and jumped into the water and swam away. And while he was out there, he ran into a gunner's mate who had a big helmet on and who was swimming in the water still wearing that helmet. Now, the rule was that if you go overboard and have this helmet, you get rid of the helmet because when you hit the water, it could snap your neck. Well, this kid was panicked and just jumped in and he was out there. Well, then Dad explained that when the explosion took place on the Bismarck Sea, the torpedo, ammunition, and whatever exploded, he said that the teakwood beams on the which were on the flight deck, 8-inch by 8-inch by 40 feet or 50 feet in width, flew like matchsticks, and everything was flying around, and that this gunner's mate had a piece of something come down and hit him smack on the head, split the helmet, creased his head, bleeding like a stuck pig, but he was alive because he'd violated the rules. You just never know. Dad then ended up being the highest-ranking officer to survive the sinking who was alive and uninjured. 318 of the crew went down with the ship. That's about a third of what they had. He also stated that he had been floating in the water for about an hour when he got to the cargo net, the destroyer escort Taylor. By this time, his hands and arms were so numb that he could not grab the rope, so he crabbed his way up the cargo net until he got up to the top and then rolled onto the deck. And one of the local sailors here says, "Slow down, big boy." And my dad replied in an ever so polite manner, "You slow down, you son of a bitch." Okay, the handouts are for you to keep if you have any interest in them. If you didn't get one and still would like one, I'll be more than happy to give one to you. Hopefully this will give you some idea of what has taken place. I believe my dad was commander of this post for some while, as well as the VFW, post 2715. My brother is a retired captain in the Navy, sitting up here in the T-shirt. He's got the plaque, I believe, for the Navy that he brought along for us. My son is currently a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve as a veterinarian, is currently a commander of a field hospital in Georgia where he's training. He wanted to go to the Navy because his grandfather did and his uncle did, but as a veterinarian, animal doctors go strictly and only to the Army, so that's where he was assigned. On one of his summer tours, however, he was on Oahu, tough duty, and he started off that day at Pearl Harbor with the Navy. Then he went to Hickam Field for the Air Force. Then he went to Schofield Barracks for the Army. Then he went over the mountain to Kaneohe for the Marines. So he served 4 branches and left out only the Coast Guard, so he got his wish. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. If you have questions, we can take them after we get the whole business consumed. But I thank you for the time and the honor to be able to speak about what our father did. Thank you.
What a story. Thanks, Bill. I have 3 people we're going to talk about briefly. We'll try to get you out of here in 30 minutes or so. The first one is Joe LaDuke, my father. And my father, Joe and Maxine, wanted to start a new life. He got away from the tire factory in Miami, Commerce, Oklahoma, which is a home to Mickey Mantle. So we used to go down there summertime and see Mickey Mantle's house. They moved to Kansas City, Missouri. Joe worked in a car factory, which was a Fisher Body, and so he was making cars in 1940. My mother, Maxine, was the oldest of 10 children, and Joe was one of 7. 2 died early, and the remaining 4, 1 brother and 2 sisters. The brothers served in the military. In November 1940, a Fairfax site was established to build a B-25 plant. In that plant, they had a choice between Fairfax and Kansas City and Tulsa, and they selected Kansas City. And their original thought was it was going to be a B-25 plant and a B-29. But it turned out it was only a B-25 plant. This is the front part of that building. April 1941, the first steel was erected. And this is the B-25, the end product. But they started the construction. You can see the steel going up. This is my father to the far right. At the end of the war, he was the general manager of the tail section, and there was about 280 people in that number 21 unit that he was in. November 26, 1941, I arrived in the world 11 days before Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese on December 7th. In middle December, Joe started working at the B-25 plant. So they had closed the Fisher Body plant in Kansas City, and most of those members there who weren't drafted into the service went over and started building airplanes. You talk about the greatest generation. Bill talked about building those ships. Wait till you see what happened in Kansas City. At its peak, the plant employed 24,349 men and women. A majority of them were women. I bet you remember hearing about Rosie the Riveter. These are some more pictures My dad's on the front row to the left. He's on the front row to the left, and he's on the back row to the left. I'm going to show you quite a few pictures from the plant, but I want to talk a little bit first about the first completed B-25 was December 23rd, 1941. So that was the first completed plane out of that plant. It made its maiden flight on January 3rd, 1942. So basically, they were off and running. Okay, April 28th, 1942, which was a little bit less than 4 months. Guess what happened? Jimmy Doolittle led the raid over Tokyo with 16 B-25 planes, and guess where all those planes were built? Kansas City. So I think everybody remember Jimmy Doolittle, the raid over over Tokyo. They flew off the Hornet. Let me also say General Eisenhower, his personal plane during the war was a B-25, and it's on display at the Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota if you ever want to see it. Between 1941 and the end of the war, May 8, 1945, 6,680 B-25s were made in Kansas City. Their top production was 300 in 1 month, but that B-25 was a 2-engine plane and could get speeds up to over 300 miles an hour, and could carry a very, very large load of bombs. It was very instrumental in winning the war, along with the B-17s, the B-29, and the other planes we had. We'll talk about some of those in just a minute. My father went to work every day with a white shirt and tie. At the end of the war, his title was General Foreman of the Tail Section. I'm going to go through some pictures real quick of the plant in Kansas City, but you can see what kind of a production line they had. I mean, they were way above their time, but it was just unbelievable. We found this picture on the internet somewhere. We thought at one time that person down below was my father, but we've blown it up. We don't think it is. This is the final picture of the last airplane made in Kansas City, and when I had an aunt and her 2 children moved to Oklahoma to Kansas City when the war started, as her husband was going to war. She babysat while my mom worked at a restaurant close to the plant. She worked every day from early in the morning to middle of the afternoon. And I had an older brother and older sister, so we had about 8 or 9 people living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Kansas City. Many thanks to the home front during the war, as they made it happen. Everyday life across the U.S. was dramatically altered. Food, gas, and clothing were rationed. People had victory gardens to provide their food. Families were issued ration stamps to buy their allotment of everything, including meat, sugar, fat, butter, vegetables, and fruits to gas, tires, clothing, and fuel oil. Those people on the home front are very important for the war effort. After the war was over, they shut down the airplane plant, and Joe started to work for Safeway. Eventually became a manager. We moved to Slater, Missouri, where I started 5th grade. This is 3 of the planes that he built in Kansas City. And on the back of this, he wrote, these 3 B-25 light bombers, tail second airplanes were built in the year 1943 at the North American plant located in Fairfax District along the Missouri River. The twin tail assembly was built complete in Department 21 under the supervision of Joseph LaDuke, general manager, and his complete supervisory staff. They were used as light bombers in World War II. About 3 or 4 years ago, Becky paid me. I should have introduced Becky's here tonight too. Welcome, Becky. We went to Jabara Air Force Base in Wichita, and I got a ride in a B-25 for about 30 minutes. So this was us prior to getting on the plane. Again, I want to talk about Jimmy Doolittle. This was his 5-man crew, and then this is the sign that Bill had a little comment, but we got a date with the son of a bitch. Let's be on time. So they were trying to make sure everybody got to work on time. Okay, this one down, 2 to go. We're making good progress. Okay, Bob Ruth. Bob Ruth is Becky's dad who raised her. I want to start with Bob's story and tell you where I found out most of the history for the presentation. His granddaughter Angie Ruth had a class project to interview a veteran. She picked Grandpa Bob, and he spent a considerable amount of time answering 61 questions. He kept a daily log when he was on the ship. It is too bad other teachers did not give assignments like this. I am printing his 7 handwritten pages for you to read. I got a few things over there I can pass out if anyone's interested and picking up a copy of that. Becky is Bob is Becky's dad who raised her. He married Becky's mother, Elaine, who was a widow from the war. And we'll talk about her, Joe, in a little bit. September 1942, Bob enlisted in the U.S. Navy, sworn in Des Moines, Iowa, and started boot camp in Great Lakes that lasted only 4 months. Same place that Bill's dad went to. Base pay then was $26 per month. When enlisted, he was an apprentice seaman and ended up a fireman 3rd class at the end. He was sent to 4 months advanced training as a machinist and then assigned to the USS Pasteur in March of 1943. This is a ship he was on. Not a very good looking one, but I'll tell you what they did. When Bob was assigned, they were in the Atlantic Ocean with ports in Norfolk, Virginia, and Bayonne, New Jersey. In 1943, they moved to the Pacific with ports in San Francisco, California, and Pearl Harbor. Major battles they were in, which were probably some of the ones that Bill's dad was in, were Marshall Island, New Guinea, Philippines, and Japan. They were stationed in Auckland, New Zealand. The ship basically, the main function of the ship was to provide refrigerated and frozen provision, fresh vegetables, and meat to the fleet and troops of all branches of service. When he was on there, he kept track of the miles that they traveled. And how would you believe in the 3.5 years they had to deliver a lot of food to a lot of different places? They traveled 220,000 miles on that ship. I mean, they provided a lot of food to a lot of different people. They were in and out of all New Zealand a lot. This is a picture of Bob who married Becky's mother. We were very fortunate to get Bob and her brother Rob to go on the Kansas Honor Flight, which we paid the entire cost for both of them. And this is a picture that they took with Bob Dole when they were in Washington D.C. And this is a picture of Bob is buried. Bob and Elaine both are buried in the Higginsville Veterans Cemetery. Beautiful cemetery, beautiful. And I don't know whether people realize that, but when husband and wife are buried, they're buried on top of each other. And whoever dies first goes deepest, and then the next person. But they both are buried there. We make it whenever time we're back in Missouri, we get a chance to stop by there. when the war was over, Bob's ship was in the Japanese water, and they stayed there for a few months. They were able to take 3 trips inside of Japan. They went to Kuri, Sasebo, and they took a trip to Hiroshima. How do you say it? Hiroshima. Okay, thank you, Bill. I guess they loaded them up on a truck and took them into the area where the bomb went off, and then brought them right back. It was a pretty quick trip. When Bob brought a tea set home for somebody at the time, but we ended up getting it. But he bought it in Japan at the time. He basically traveled back. They traveled back to the United States. He was discharged in January 15th, 1946. After the war, Bob returned to Shenandoah, Iowa, got married and started working. Got married to Elaine for Brown Shoe Fit. This is the same company that's downtown here in McPherson. Matter of fact, the managers have chances to buy parts of shares in other stores. And Bob during his years had bought parts of 12 different stores. He really tried to get part of McPherson before he retired, but he couldn't get it. But he wanted to be owner of a part of this one, but they wouldn't allow him to do that. They retired. They both are deceased now. But this is a story of another U.S. Navy veteran on the home front. Went and served 3.5 years, and basically did a lot of good work for the world. I saved Joe till last, and he was the one that paid the ultimate sacrifice, guys. Joe grew up in a small town, northern Iowa, Clarion. He had 1 brother and 2 sisters. His brother was in the Army later, but remained in the USA. Didn't ever go overseas. Joe was a star athlete of the family in football, track, and wrestling. Iowa is recognized as a great in wrestling, and in his junior year for the weight classification, he was a runner-up state champion. So you see what kind of an athlete he was. He received several offers to play football, but elected not to go to college. He was established working for A&P grocery store, so he was like 27 years old when the draft came. Joe was drafted in March of 1942, being 27 years old. Due to his being older, he oversaw the escorting of the other draftees to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. This is a picture of Becky with his grave up in Iowa. So I'm going to go back just a second. Okay. Joe was assigned to the 90th Division, Company C, 357 Regiment, and was sent to Camp Barkley, Texas. The 90th, known as TO in World War I, TO stood for Texas, Oklahoma, because that's where most of the people came from. But in World War II, they came from all over. So they renamed it from the Texas, Oklahoma to the Tough Hombres. We will talk more about this company later at the very end of this. In September 1942 in Shenandoah, Iowa, he married Lane Barton. She was able to, by train, to go to Abilene, Texas, and see him when he had time off. Those soldiers in World War II, guys, were well trained. They trained a lot. They trained hard. He continued training. They even sent them to California and Louisiana. While at Camp Barkley in Abilene, Texas, Becky was conceived. She was born on their first anniversary in Shenandoah, Iowa, while Joe was in California on maneuvers. he got word by telegram that she had arrived. He was in the chow line, so that's when he found out. That was in September, guys. In January, 4 months later, he basically got to take a leave, and in his first and only time he got to see his new daughter. And let me see if I can find that picture. That's the picture of Joe holding Becky Joe. Joe is, you can probably guess where that came from. In February 1944, the 90th Division moved to Fort Dix, New Jersey. You know why they moved to Fort Dix? They were getting ready to get on a ship to go to overseas. That same month, they sailed to England. They were stationed in Wales. That's where from February to June, where they trained and got ready for the invasion. There was a racetrack there, and there was some buildings there, and that's where they stayed at. Okay, on June 8th, they loaded on a ship to so they get closer to Utah Beach. That was on the June 6th. That was the date of the invasion. They basically did not go in until the 8th of June. They loaded on the landing craft on June 8th, and at 1400 hours, they hit Utah Beach. So they hit Utah Beach at D-Day +2. The next 4 hours, they had to travel 6 miles by foot with all their equipment to get close to St. Marie-Glisse, which was where their station point was, being up with everybody. And then all the equipment started getting closer to them the next day. All the equipment and supplies arrived on the 9th, and they joined you heard probably the 82nd Airborne, or the 101st was further, I don't know, one or the other, but 82nd Airborne had come in the night before D-Day. They were in very heavy fighting, but the 90th was going to relieve the 82nd Airborne after they made some more progress. So this was on the 10th of June. They basically joined the 82nd Airborne and started fighting. Have any of you heard of morning reports in the Army? A few of you have. Want to show you some morning. This is a morning report on June 6th. Every day in the military, back then, they don't do it now. They have better ways they do it. But they had to keep track of what that unit was doing. And Becky's dad's unit was a 357 Company C. And you can see they were getting on board the ship on 6 June. Take a look down to the far right. How many men were in the Company C? They had total of 186. There's only about 3 officers of that group, and the rest were enlisted men. Then on the next one, on the 8th of June, it says Northern France disembarked from the ship and loaded on landing craft. 1400 landed on beachhead at 1430, moved inland by foot, arrived at assembly point 1730, distance 6 miles. So that's how we know what was going on. There's a lot of information. If you start digging, you can find out what's happened. On June 12th, go to the next one. That's the day that Joe died, and you see down about halfway down the page, Tallman, Staff Sergeant. They actually lost on that day the first sergeant, the staff sergeant, and another staff sergeant on that same day. Okay, Remember we were at 188 people in that Company C 2 days before? Take a look at what they're down to now. They're down to 133 or something like that. So they've lost, in that 2 days of fighting, they've lost 50-some guys, or either getting killed or hurt. Let me tell you how the Army operated back then. The 90th Division, at full strength, was about 14,000 people. But when a soldier died, guess what they did? They used replacements. They just came back and replaced those soldiers. So they kept those units. So within a couple days, they were back up to 180 men. And I'll show you some stuff at the end about there was about 25 or 35,000 men served in the 90th Division during that war. That's because they used replacements to keep making sure their units were at full strength. Becky's dad, when he was killed, we had some information from some of the people telling us how to get his military records, and we found out that he was his body was intact, and it appeared that he died from a concussion. And the Germans were well known for their firing the 88s, and so we think that's really probably what killed him. It was probably pretty quick. He was buried in Sainte Marie Glise for several years. We knew which cemetery it was. We knew who was on each side of him. I mean, just unbelievable the amount of records you can find on that. After the war in 1948, they had to make a decision as to what to do with the bodies, because they were going to build a really beautiful cemetery there in France. We've been there twice. Oh my God, it's so beautiful. Becky's mother was already remarried at the time. She gave his parents the choice. What do you want to do with Joe's body? And they wanted him home. I really wish they would have left him there. I mean, the cemetery, they take care of the thing. We'll show you a picture of his grave in just a minute. Joe earned two. He owned the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. And Becky has those with us today. If anybody wants to see what they look like with their names on the back of them. So this is a picture of Joe and Elaine on their wedding. This is his high school picture. Okay. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit more about how we found out where Joe died. We've been to over to Europe twice, and the first time we thought he had been killed in Amperville, yeah. But then we took our whole family over there in 2014, okay. And we were in a bus, a big van, all 8 of us. We were touring everything. We were about ready to head back. And my granddaughter told Scott, who was driving, said, "Hey, slow down. I want to take a picture." Well, slow down. I looked over. There was a sign said 90th Division Memorial to the right. So we ended up taking off to go there. So let me show you some pictures. Okay, let me backtrack a minute. Want to talk about what happened. United States. We're talking about the greatest generation. When the war hit in 1939-40, look how many soldiers we had. Had less than half a million. By 1945, at the end of 1945. We had 12 million people in uniform. So we went from 500,000 up to 12 million. But there were over 16 million served during that period of time. We had 407,000 killed and 671,000 wounded. 250,000 were killed in the European theater. 160 died in the Pacific theater. And then we also had 130,000 American prisoners of war. Other thing I want to kind of show you a little bit, we're talking about airplanes built. In Kansas City, they made 6,680 planes. The B-29 in Wichita, they made 1,644. So between Kansas City and Wichita, they made over 8,300 planes in Kansas. The total number of planes built during the war, 25, 29 to 17, was like 26,000. So over about a third of the planes built during the war were built in our state of Kansas. We've got to be proud of that. Okay, we're going to wind it up here a little bit. When we went to Europe, this is Utah Beach, and so we took a picture there. This is our two children. There's the 90th Division. I'll talk a little bit about that, but they are very, very well decorated division. This is Becky and Scott, our kids at the that. Then here we have Mom. I want you to look. These are our two granddaughters, but they belong to the junior auxiliary here in McPherson. So they wore their junior auxiliary McPherson things over there. So I wanted everybody to see that. This is our grandson, who at that time was 4 or 5 years old. He's now 17, playing in the sand at Utah, where his grandpa came in. These are all all three of our grandkids. This is all the 5 descendants of Joe. This is our 2 granddaughters. This is Brett in front of a tank. Brett's now 6'4", 215, so he's a little bit bigger than that. This is Gugersville, the town where we know Joe got killed at. When we went there, this is a sign that we found and it basically says the 357 Company C was on the flanks on the 12th of June, and this was the day that Joe died. They were thanking the 300 men who basically helped them liberate their village. Now I want to talk just briefly about the 90th. The 90th started in World War I, so they're still in existence today. There's still people in the 90th Division serving. One of the things I want to talk just very briefly about, George Patton was their commander. He says, sometimes I think you don't know how good you are. You are the best soldiers in the world. It was a great honor to command you, General Patton. The 90th had more days of combat than any other division in the ETO. The 90th had at least one unit in combat with the enemy every day from D-Day to VE Day. It wasn't a day they were not in combat. The 90th included more than 35,000 men at one time or another, not more than 14,000. This is this replacement where they kept replacing. The other thing, and let's go back down to the 90th liberated Flossenburg concentration camp. And that's one of the things they're very proud. We went to a lot of conventions. We had a lot of those concentration camp survivors come and visit us and thanking those men of the 90th Division. But one of the big things is, if you look down here, they captured the Merker salt mine intact with Germany's store of all of his gold and art treasures. So if you know whether that is, but the 90th Division was the one that captured those. They got some 4 Medal of Honor winners. I mean, they had over somewhere in there. How many people were killed? They had 3,889 men were given the Purple Heart. Okay, basically this is my presentation, but I'm really proud of my 2 father-in-laws, my father. I'm proud of what Bill's father did. This was the greatest generation, people, and I think we have to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Turn over to you, Dan.
Well, I'm almost afraid to open this thing up for questions because all of those presentations were great. I do want to say that as we've seen tonight, it's not just the combat soldier that's the heroes out there. It takes all the people in supply, for example, to furnish them with ammunition, with food, with fuel. It takes 9 or 10 people to support one combat veteran. So they're all heroes, every one of them. And the folks back home that built the airplanes, 6,000 airplanes. How many do you think are still surviving today? What? 2. 2. Out of all those 6,000, there's only 2 still surviving.
Hey, Dan, one of the other things I forgot to mention, the 357, when they started out with 188 guys or whatever, at the end of the war, there was only 4 left from that 188 that didn't get hurt or injured.
Out of the original. Okay. Briefly, a couple of questions. Anyone have anything they'd like to ask? No, you're pretty quiet. I could go on here, but I'm not. It's a shame that we didn't start doing this a long time ago because we have very few World War II veterans left. And their stories, a lot of them are not recorded. And we do military honors for veterans all the time, and it's my privilege to get to look at their discharge papers, and it doesn't tell the fraction of the story, but the medals that these veterans have earned and some of the places they've been and done, it's amazing. One thing I always like to do, and I'm going to do that, 2 things. First of all, if you didn't see, Becky LaDuke's right here, wave at the crowd. And then right behind here is Bill's wife, Peggy, okay, and then family there. But once again, I'm going to ask every veteran in the room to please stand and let us recognize you. Every veteran, stand up. Thank you. And remember, we do this the 3rd Tuesday of every month. So please come back, bring friends, and we need people for sponsors that pay the $100 for the food and so forth. We need veterans to tell their stories. So get out there and do a little recruiting for us, would you please? Thank you. Turn your phones back on. Thank you, Roy. I'll go turn my phone up so I can hear it when it rings.